So I'll be highlighting some elements of the practice and our preoccupations around oral interview material, and look at two STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths funded collaborations, and I'll consider what they bring to us and what we bring to them. So I need to acknowledge at this point that the two collaborations that I'll be talking about are funded by the Irish Science Foundation Ireland Discover programme. And this programme is very much focused on encouraging public engagement with STEM and on creating STEM public dialogue on issues relating to societal challenges. The majority of the programmes are 12 months. This just gives you an idea of the aims, with a maximum budget of €50,000. And the programme aims include raising awareness of and encouraging people, particularly girls and minorities, into STEM-related careers. So you can see maybe that a lot of these projects take place in schools with mathematicians and engineers going out to schools. But they're also aimed to encourage dialogue with STEM experts. Now, this is quite often with a top-down flow of information, with STEM insights and understandings being disseminated outwards. So this isn't necessarily a funding stream that you would think of first for tradition archives, but this programme has been our main source of project funding for the past 2 years. The two projects include one on infectious disease and one on thrift and resource use and circular economy in an urban context in the early 20th century. But I'll go back to the Cork Folklore Project. It's affiliated with the University in Cork. It's community-based. It was deliberately founded on the north side of the city, a side of the city that had been underdeveloped through the decades preceding 1996 when it was funded. It's a partnership between the university, which funds a half-time manager. I work alongside my normal day job as research director. And then the Department of Social Protection pays the researchers who are on half-time community employment schemes, and these are schemes for people who are long-term unemployed, and also other schemes for people living with addiction and mental health issues. Audio interviewing really is at the core of what we do. We create recorded conversations about life in Cork and elsewhere in the past and present. Very briefly on our approach to interviewing, and the picture here is odd. We all look odd, and that's because we're listening, and I leave it in for that reason. Listening isn't very photogenic, I've discovered, and we all know perhaps that interviewing isn't much more so. And this ties in again with the idea of how do we communicate what we do. We're not very visual in terms of our practice, not necessarily anyway. But our approach to interviewing includes slow methodologies. We try to take time and make space for really in-depth exploration of topics, and for the negative, and for the unexpected, and for performance to break out. We have a lot of thematic collection projects, but more recently we've been looking at more diffuse place-based inquiry, rather than kind of life history interviewing models. And it's amazing what happens when people feel permission to slow down and don't have that implicit end point that the life history model has. So by now, since 1996, we're only babies compared to most of our colleagues, but we've built up a fairly rich, multi-layered, quite dense account of life in a particular time and place. Now, here's an idea of our other activities. They include mentoring, support and peer support with other groups, to individuals, organisations involved with social inclusion, creative initiatives, health initiatives, and we act as a linking body an awful lot between different actors, people who know that there's something heritagey that they want or have come to us, and we link them up with other heritagey actors. But I particularly like how our interviewee and supporter, Irish Jack, puts it. He talks about where our centre was. It's valid, it's near Shandon. It's where the old credit union first operated in 1969. It's got amazing, dedicated people pulling the culture pumps. It's cerebral, uplifting, and it's the anecdotal voice of Cork. It can be subversive. So he puts it a lot better than I could. But essentially what we do is we deal in talk. We collect it, we safeguard it, we provide access to it, and we disseminate it in a curated format. And the specificity of this medium brings with it a range of considerations that we, as heavily implicated archives, as oral archives, really do have to articulate and advocate for. It's got a long-term linear nature, it's got its cultural and local specificity, its richness and evocative power, its intimacy, and we could also add, in terms of use and dissemination of audio, its oddly hidden status as the poor relation to text and images. So I've actually been banging on about these kinds of things, along with my oral history and tradition archives colleagues for a while. We've explored it here and elsewhere. And those questions and issues will be relevant and sort of lurking in the background here. I'm actually going to just do a whistle-stop tour, but all of these considerations are very much present in our daily work. We're dealing with the messiness of lived experience, as Tiber pointed out earlier. The material is messy, it's non-standard in a host of ways, and it's sometimes hard to apprehend for other people, for us even, to apprehend, particularly with cultural distance, as it's even less cut and dried, perhaps less uniform than other cultural forms. And I wonder, is that why it can be difficult to articulate its worth and the worth of our methods clearly in certain broader context? But conversely, is it also, along with its richness, of course, why interlocutors who come from outside, including in our case healthcare bodies, STEM funding bodies and others, can get so very excited when they actually hear the material? So in the context of our recent STEM-inflected collaborations, I'd like to argue that we really do need to advocate very deliberately for the richness and potential of our materials and methods. And that may well involve using our elbows to assert space for this. And we need to also be careful to maintain our approaches and our material, not just as illustration to societal challenge-focused projects, not just as the nice little thing that you can link into, but as full partners, because we have an awful lot to contribute in terms of insights and, as people have already said, other views onto meaning making. But a bit of show and tell. There's a bit on our archives here that contain a wide range of material with audio collections at its core. Some other outputs include an online memory map where the audio and the transcript are accessible together. They're nice little tasters that can be browsed with a map-based interface, but they are linked back to the individual catalogue entries. We're trying to pull people back again to the long-term stable resources that are there. Like many of our colleagues, we carried out a rapid response collection project with COVID-19. And before COVID, we were working on a project related to infectious disease and vaccination in response to the fact that our colleague Beth Brint is very exercised. She's an immunologist, very exercised, of course, at the fact that vaccination for measles, for example, in North America and Europe, they've been a victim of their own success. And the vaccine hesitancy rates are mounting. And one contributing element to this is, of course, the fact that the memory of Johnny up the road who died from the measles, the community memory and the family and personal memory of people whose lives were very, very badly impacted by these diseases is fading. So we actually started to put together, look to put together a resource to bring this kind of oral testimony back to the fore. And of course, there's a rupture where scientific argumentation, rational scientific argumentation, was not achieving the desired results. And we see all of this coming around again, of course, in COVID. And the case for listening to lived experience is always strong, but it becomes easier for the STEM side of the house to appreciate that kind, to apprehend this in those kinds of contexts. So what we initially wanted to do, our idea was to create an online resource that would bring oral testimony and biomedical commentary together, collaborating with Beth, an immunologist Beth Brint, an immunologist in UCC. Initially, we kind of had a sort of mechanistic idea where we'd have a disease and we'd have the medical commentary and then we'd have the oral testimony. But COVID hit and we didn't do any interviewing for a while, and that actually worked to our advantage in some ways in understanding the way we looked at the material we already had, and we saw the way that these narratives break out as tiny hints. A woman talking about it's amazing in the context of an interview, it's amazing what comes to your mind, she said. When I was in school, we were in low babies in the smallest class in school, and there was a little girl with me. I'll never forget, her name was Kitty O'Brien, and she said, I'll never forget she had straight hair cut in a bob and a little bow, a little red bow. This was back in the 1920s. And then she just continued to say that both she and Kitty got the measles. When she returned after having the measles, Kitty had died. And this is just a tiny little fragment of a memory that comes in the material that we already have. Another man talking about how he ended up being a newspaper seller, and that was because his mother had lost her first husband, who was the newspaper seller, and 2 of her children within 6 months to TB, whooping cough and diphtheria. So we were forced to slow down a bit, and rather than doing directed interviewing or inquiry, to listen to the testimony that was already there and that really wasn't talked about all that much. It was just those flashes of the silence that can come after that kind of loss and trauma. A couple of events here. So we're going to go to the Cork memory map, actually, and we're going to hook back in. We'll return to catching stories in a minute, but we'll hook into the second project, which was about circular economy. And I suppose when we think of folklore and different ways of interacting with our environment in the context of ecological sustainability, we often think further back and we think rurally. But we wanted to put a focus on urban populations. I think the anthropologist Hyland Eriksson has he's pointed out that sometimes the long ago and far away material can be quite alienating to the urban poor, who are at the brunt of much of the environmental degradation in the world. So it's nice to also bring in that kind of balance within a folkloric context. So, because I really want to give you some audio quite soon now, I'm going to just pull up something here. Not washing the dead, the city baths, where is he? Collecting waste with Pedro. This is something that we already had collected from the Memory Map project, and we found that when we slowed down for the Memory Map project, where we were interviewing for an online map, people really slowed down, and what came out of it was a lot of spontaneous mention of multiple diversified livelihood strategies, the ways that people stretched resources, got creative, acquired resources, sometimes by liberating rabbits from a delivery truck and getting them into their houses, stroke hauling fish, picking up vegetables on your walks to the country. But there was also so much mending and stretching and resoling and rehealing and dyeing and passing on of clothing and so on. And also this kind of use of waste. So Jim McKeown here.
But my daily chore I hated was to tackle Pedro and Donkey with a few pigs and go around in the neighbourhood collecting waste. We just call it waste, was leftover food, you know, if we mashed bits of bread or feed pigs. So every day when I came in from school, when all the boys started playing football, I was stuck with this child, right, and went off down the lane.
I'm going to return now and scoot through some of the activities that we had with the Catching Stories. We had a pop-up time travel vaccination station going with a great story that we had from a guy who was vaccinated as a child with what they called the branding iron, and in the 1950s. And he talked about being in this Grattan Street vaccination centre, moving up along a long bench with the kids coming out with shocked faces or screaming, and he told this wonderful story. We turned it into a culture night event, and we carried out other events there. We also had a surprise exhibition. We found that the University Library had a slot coming up for an exhibition. And I suppose here we really wanted to look at how are we going to foreground the oral testimony and the archived interviews in underpinning it all, either in audio or text. So we did it in, the availability of QR codes did actually seem to prompt listening in a younger cohort, but we wanted more. So we went to our colleague there, Jeffrey Wheater in music, and we brought him our dreams. One was an arse or bottom activated bench to go with Joe Scanlon along the bench towards the branding iron, and the other was to hook in with a story that I would have played you about a man who was training to be a doctor during a 1950s polio epidemic in Cork, and he and his student colleagues helped out in the hospitals. And they had to manually ventilate a 4-year-old girl through the night. She was too small to fit into the breathing apparatus that they used for people who were paralysed with polio. And he tells this story. So just one other thing about the interdisciplinary exchange. When we were cutting down the text, the introductory text, again, this is what our STEM colleague identified that could go, because it doesn't mean anything. And that was our best attempt to bring in all of the reference to all those interactions involving power, compassion and lack thereof, stigma, violence, loss and rupture. So it was a very, very interesting exercise in feeling each other out. I mentioned the story about the little girl who had died. We kind of based the exhibition around a few of these strongest stories. This was the one about the manual ventilation, and you had to pump the ventilator with your hand to hear the story. You could use a QR code as well, but it was the audio trigger. And we got good feedback on that. You know, the manual ventilation piece really took us into Paul's shoes. Here's our bench with a very distinguished visitor trying it out and going on that journey with Joe Scanlon towards the branding iron. And of course, we brought in experiences of COVID-19. In our questionnaires on COVID-19, people really had started to connect back to the Spanish family memories of Spanish flu and polio epidemics in Cork. And this is just a piece done by an artist. Don't have time to go into that. Just to show you some of the feedback. We had a book as well, but some of the comments, great ones that we'll be able to bring to our funders to show the importance of vaccination is being talked about after people visit. Others, people shared family memories. Some responded in pictures, and I think definitely having the post-its encouraged that kind of a response. And others connected it to, contemporary experiences. Did we succeed with the privileging of audio? Some of the responses showed that people did really appreciate it. I particularly like this. The sound over screen approach is great. Feels like there's more space in the brain to really hear and process the stories. People talking about the ventilation piece as well. And this one, she talks about the ventilator prop engages the audio story, or what guarantee this exhibition will haunt every visitor. And I really wish that I had put haunting visitors onto the aims and outcomes of the project. I'll finish up here just to kind of look at this urban thrift project. I won't look at it in any detail. Just to say we've sort of we're framing what we do already in the context of these STEM public engagement projects, because they're the only people who currently get excited about what we do and want to give us money. And I suppose we need to start thinking about the implications of that. But with this particular project, in any case, Those are some of the events that we're having with regard to them and some of our partners. Something that we've found ourselves having to stress again and again in this landscape is that the material foregrounded in these initiatives, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. The archival collections not only underpin the work, but they're available beyond the curated content in terms of scope and in terms of timelines. To researchers, practitioners, individuals, community members, and hopefully they'll outlast this iteration of interpretations. Without dissemination, few will know the power and relevance and wonder of the material in repositories like this, but collaborations like this are a great way to get funding, to reach new audiences and collaborators and people who would benefit from accessing the material, and for us to frame the material in slightly new and currently popular ways that do get attention and are relevant to the big questions and challenges we face. But it is often the case, like most people in this room know, people see the tip of the iceberg. And it behooves us to keep reminding them that the material needs to be taken on its own terms to an extent, whether that be designers, collaborators, funders, audiences who we also need to listen to, of course. But we need to do this through constantly signposting back maybe to collections, making space for the testimony in whatever form, and for the audio specifically in our case, and devising ways to encourage people to slow down enough to see or hear what this material can bring to these conversations, and also what our methods and our ways of seeing and engaging with people can bring. Thanks very much, folks.